In this bonus lesson, we're going to focus on working with color in Illustrator, and I'm going to give you some tips on how you can deal with it more easily, because I understand that looking at all these sliders and numbers and letters that represent colors can be pretty confusing if you're not used to dealing with them. So what I have here is some artwork that's going to be used as a tiled pattern. This is the source artwork that would then be processed to be a repeated pattern, but I think it's a really good example because it has lots of colors. They're very unique, but let's say that maybe we wanted to adjust these colors after we came up with this. Maybe we're not happy with the way this is anymore. There's a whole lot of different shapes in here, and it's, selecting all of the yellows might seem really difficult, and then knowing how to make adjustments to that yellow color might not be that obvious. So let's start by just taking a look at our basic color picker. So I'm going to just select this yellow color and open up this color picker by double clicking on my fill color. And now I just want to walk you through what we're looking at. First of all, we've already made adjustments to colors using the color picker like I am right now, where you're just clicking and dragging and moving this around, and we get a little preview of what our color is going to be and what it was originally. If I click on this, it'll go back to our original color. So what this is representing is saturation from left to right, so no saturation on the left, 100% saturation on the right, and then brightness from top to bottom. So 100% brightness at the top, 0% brightness at the bottom. So if we take out all of the saturation and push the brightness all the way up, we get pure white. If we take all the saturation out and put all of the brightness down, then we get pure black. So that makes sense. From that point, we can move over to this slider right here, the hue slider, and this is going to change what hue of color we're dealing with. So this isn't touching the saturation or brightness, which is why my little picker is staying right where it is, but the hue slider is going to shift that spectrum around so I can go to magenta or blue or green or whatever color I'm after. And as I'm changing all of these values, you can see that all of these numbers over here are shifting. So that's what I want to focus on now, is what all of these numbers actually mean. So let's just pick a nice bright blue color. First of all, we have HSB. Now those three go together, and you'll notice that each one of these has a little button on it. Right now, H is what's selected. That stands for hue. So what this is telling us in these numbers right here, these degrees, is that we have a hue value of 210 degrees. And we'll get to why that's measured in degrees in just a little bit. But the important thing is that's the hue value. And as I shift this up and down, you can see that number changes. So all the way down at the bottom, we have pure red. That is a hue value of 0. Push that all the way up through the entire spectrum. Eventually we get to 360, which is the same as 0. It's a circle. The next value down here is S, and that stands for saturation. So my color, my current color right here, has a saturation value of 86%. And if I were to click and drag this to the left, I'm taking out saturation, and as I do that, you can see that number is decreasing. So this is allowing us to specify values for these different parts of any color. So I could type in any number here. If I wanted 50% saturation, I could type that in and hit enter, and that closed out my color picker, but that now has 50% saturation. So that's one way to adjust these colors. I could also select that number and just tap my arrow key up or down to increment that one number at a time. The next value is B, which stands for brightness. So hue, saturation, brightness all go together. If you ever see HSB, that's what those three mean. So you're picking a color based on its hue, its saturation, and its brightness. So just like going left and right with saturation, if I drop this down, then the brightness is going to decrease because we're getting less and less bright. If we go up, that number is going to increase. And that has a percentage value of 0 to 100, just like the saturation has 0 to 100. Now I'm usually picking out my colors using this view of the color picker, but like I said, there's this little button here and all these empty buttons right here. So what do these do? Well, because I have it set to hue, this slider is adjusting the hue. But if I changed that to saturation, then everything over here updates and it looks a little bit different. Now instead of the hue being right here, it's over here. So left to right becomes your hue. Up and down is still brightness, and then this slider is going to just adjust the saturation. You can see how that's affecting my hues as I'm adjusting that. So it's just a little bit different way to interact with the color picker. In the same way, I can select the B for brightness, and now this slider is only adjusting the brightness value. Then left to right is the hue, up and down is the saturation. So that's how you can switch between those different views. Like I said, I'm almost always on the hue. That's just what I'm used to, and it makes sense. But if you ever wanted to, you can swap between those just by clicking on these radio buttons. Next up is this R, G, and B, and these stand for red, green, and blue. So if I were to put this in the green area and I make it really bright, really saturated, then we have 0 on the red, 255 on the green, and 0 on the B, which means we don't have any red in this color selection, we don't have any blue in this color selection, and we have a value of 255 in the green. So what are these units that we're measuring in, and why is this 255? Well, these values are how you measure color being displayed on a screen like your monitor or your phone. And the range of each one of these color channels, red, green, or blue, goes from 0 up to 255. And you can mix and match any of those red, green, and blue colors at a value between 0 and 255. And that actually gives you over 16 million color possibilities. And this is just another way of displaying your colors or putting them in values that will allow you to understand how those colors should be looking. In this case, it's very obvious to me because 0 is set for the red and the blue, so I know it's going to be a lot of green, especially because my green value is set to 255. If I were to turn this down to 100, I would expect that this would be a darker version of that green. There's still no red, there's still no blue, but this value is less than half of what it was. So if I click off of that, it applies it, and sure enough, now I have a darker green. But it's still 100% saturated. So how would I get that to be less saturated if I only have one value for that green color? Well, if I grab my color picker and start moving it to the left, you can see that red and blue are being introduced. This green value is almost still 100. I can kind of shift it around to try and get it there. But the further to the left I bring it, the more red and green or blue are being introduced. And if I go all the way to the left, you'll notice that all three values are exactly the same. And this is really important because what this is telling you is that if all three of these numbers are the same, there is no saturation at all. It's purely a grayscale value between black and white. So just out of curiosity, let's see what happens if I bring this all the way down to black. Well, as you might expect, that means there's no color information at all. Red, green, and blue values are all set to 0. And if I bring this all the way up to white, then we have 255 on red, green, and blue. So all three of those colors at their max blended together give you pure white, which is very different from pigment in things like ink or paint. If you mix all of the colors together, you're going to get black. That's a subtractive color method. The less ink you have or the less colors you have, the brighter it's going to be. Whereas with light and things like screens, the more colors you mix, the brighter it's going to get and the more white it's going to get. The next number we need to pay attention to is this little number sign down here. What this is representing is a hexadecimal code, which you may or may not have heard before. It can often be called just a hex code, but it is a way to be able to identify and reuse color information very quickly and easily. This is very often used in web design. If you've ever done any kind of web design, this is how colors are managed inside of HTML and CSS. And just for clarity, I'm going to move it all the way down to black. And you see that it goes down to zeros. And if I move it all the way up to white, it's all Fs. So what exactly is happening here? Well, we have two values at the beginning that are representing the red channel. Then we have 2 for green and then 2 for blue. If I bring it all the way down, obviously they go down to 0 again. So this is saying that we have no red, no green, and no blue. And as I bring this up on the left edge, you see that they increase kind of like tens, like we have 1s and 10s. So the second number of each color channel goes up faster than the first color channel. But as you'll notice right there, we have 0C, 0C, 0C. And that's just because you can't have any more numbers between 0 and 9, so they had to go A through F after that. So it's going to go from the bottom, all zeros, up to 9s, right about there. and then it's going to start going A, B, C, D, E, F, all the way up. So it's not really important that you understand how to read and interpret that, but I wanted to point it out so that you understood how the hexadecimal code system works, and that it's not just a random gibberish, group of letters and numbers. But let's say that I wanted to pick some kind of a magenta color right around here. All right, so I've got that color. I could easily double click on this and copy it, and that's going to store all of the color information that I need, all the red, green, and blue values in that hexadecimal code. So I don't have to look at the red, green, and blue color channels individually and try and remember those numbers if I want to apply it to another shape. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to select this, double click on it, Command C to copy, and click OK. Now, that applied it to this bread slice. I don't actually want to do that, so I'm going to undo till I'm back to that yellow color. And then let's say that I want to apply that to this donut. This icing could be a nice magenta color. So I'm going to select it with my direct selection tool, because this is a group, so if I grabbed it as a whole, then I can't get that single color. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to shift-click on this as well. So I have that orange color from the donut selected. Then I'll double-click on that color picker, and right here, my hex code's already selected. I'll paste that in, click off of it to see how that's going to update, and then click OK. Just like that, I was able to copy and paste that color over without having to remember any numbers. It was all stored in the clipboard of my computer. Very easy to do. Okay, so I didn't actually want that color for that donut, so I'm just going to undo that. I want to jump back into the color picker one more time just to cover one last section, which is right over here, another group of numbers. They're labeled C, M, Y, K, and these represent the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black values. Now, CMYK is a color system that is used for print. It's for the actual physical world because printers mix ink using cyan, magenta, yellow, and black inks. Now, there are different types of methods of printing that use other types of inks as well, but the majority of printers are going to be printing them using those 4 color channels. And we do not work in CMYK as motion designers because our information, all of our creations are going to be displayed on screens which use RGB. Remember the additive system where we're combining colors in light to make brighter values, whereas CMYK would be combining inks to make darker values. So the more ink you add, the darker it gets. Like I said, we're not going to be dealing with CMYK at all in this course and really in any motion design. So you don't really need to be concerned with that, but I wanted you to know what it was so you understood and it wasn't just these random numbers and letters that made no sense to you. Okay, that's enough for the color picker. Next up, I want to actually look at the color panel. So I'm going to go up to Window, down to Color, and here we go. The color panel you've seen me messing around with as well. Sometimes I like to just push and pull my red and green and blue values until I've got a color that I'm happy with. But I want to point out that you have those numbers right here going from 0 to 255 just like we did in the color picker. So you can adjust those by typing them in if you want, or you could also just copy and paste in your hexadecimal values right there. So there's that hex code I had already copied. Now I have the red, green, and blue channels set up to make up that color. This little menu right here, if we click on it, will show us other options. So we can look at HSB, which if you remember was hue, saturation, and brightness. This is just another way to mix colors. Again, we had access to that in the color picker, but the color panel gives us nice little controls that we don't have to jump into that color panel to mess with. So if I were to select this red color again, and let's say I wanted to make it less saturated, I could do that. I could shift it over to the red a little bit more, until I'm happy with the way that it looks. I'm going to undo that to get back to where I was. So those are some ways of mixing colors using the color panel or the color picker and just giving you lots of variety so that you can fine-tune and work exactly the way that you want to. But let's say that you wanted to select all of the yellow colors in this art. That might seem a little bit daunting because you might have to jump to the direct selection tool, select this yellow, hold shift, click on that one, zoom in nice and close, shift click on that one, and that's going to be a very long process. Well, one of the methods of selecting colors we've kind of already touched on. If you come up to select with something selected and go down to same, you can select other things based on your selection. So if I wanted all the yellow, I could say select the same fill color. Now all of that's selected, and that's great. I could make adjustments to this, maybe make it a little bit more orange, or maybe a little bit more bright. something like that, and then it's done. But now I've deselected it, so to reselect it I would have to again select that, go up to select, same, fill color. Nothing wrong with that. It is a pretty quick way to be able to select those colors, but there's another tool that can make selections like this pretty simple as well, and that's called the Magic Wand tool. That's this one right here. It kind of looks like a magician's wand. You click on it, and then you can make a selection by clicking on any color. So let's say I want to select this kind of mint color. I'll click on it once, and it's selected all of those colors. If I select the yellow, then it's going to select those. Click on the orange, and it's going to select those. Now, there are some properties to this tool that you may want to adjust. Because if I were to click on something like this white lid, then it's actually selected not only that color, but also this color of the background as well. So if I double click on the tool, it'll open up the Magic Wand panel, which gives us more options. Right now we have the fill color checkbox checked, and that means that it's going to be looking at the fill color of whatever I click on. But over here we have a tolerance value. So it's set to 32 right now, which means that it's going to select colors that are like the color that I'm selecting. If I were to turn this up, pretty high, and you'll notice this goes from 0 to 255, so this is literally the RGB value range. But if I were to turn this up to something around 175 and try clicking on this yellow again, it's selected a lot more than just that yellow. So generally, I don't want to select colors that are similar. I only want to select the colors that I am clicking on. So I'm going to turn that down all the way to 0. So there is no tolerance whatsoever. Now I can click on the background. It's not going to select anything else because nothing else has that color. Click on the mint or the yellow or the white. Whatever I click on, it's only going to select that color. What's really cool is that you also have these options for things like stroke color and stroke weight, and you can combine these things or just select one of them at a time, but it's a very useful tool to know how to use because it makes selecting things very, very quick and very customizable. Alright, I'm going to close out of the Magic Wand tool, and let's say that you wanted to make adjustments to your colors a little bit more quickly. Or let's say you even just wanted to assign colors to other objects a little bit more quickly than having to grab the eyedropper and sample another color or copy hex codes or anything like that. Well, there's another panel. If I come up to Window and go down to Swatches, this is kind of a library that's customizable for you to be able to put colors into so you can very easily reference them and apply them to other things. This is the default set that comes with any new document, but if I were to select, let's say, this color of the cup, I could choose something like this orange, and it's going to just update the fill or the stroke, whichever one I have active in my selection here. Now, I don't actually like that. I don't really appreciate that all of these colors are always loaded into every new document, and honestly, the first thing I normally do is remove them all. To do that, I'm just going to make sure nothing is selected, and then click on this one, hold Shift, click on white, and then click on delete. And that will remove all of the default swatches. And now I can start building my own. Now there are two left. The first one is none. That's literally just going to take out the color, which is not something you can remove. And then the next one is for registration, which is another print term. You can't remove that one either, so that's why I left it there. But now that this is all cleaned up, I could start putting colors into this and building out my own swatches. So let's say I like this green color. To get it in here, all I have to do is grab the fill right here and drag it down. And then I could grab my yellow, grab it and drag it down, select my orange. There we go, and now I can make new shapes and just swap between these colors by clicking between them. Now, I can also make groups of swatches. I cleaned this up very nicely so it doesn't really matter, but if I came down to this button right here and clicked New Color Group, I could call this Food, and then that's going to move the selected swatch in there, and I can grab these and rearrange them however I want. But now that that's a folder, it's a little bit more separate from all the other colors inside of my swatches palette, and I could even export this if I wanted to and share it with other people or be able to load it up into other Illustrator files very easily. But there's actually an even faster way of building out your swatch library from artwork that's already existing. So let's say I'm happy with all of these colors and I just want to have swatches of them now. I'm going to delete this folder by selecting it and clicking on delete, and then all I have to do is make a selection of all of my artwork and then come up to this folder right here and say New Color Group. Again, I'm going to rename this food, but I have some more options. So you can see that it's creating from my selected artwork, so from what I selected, and then we have two checkboxes. I'm going to uncheck this one that says Convert Process to Global just for now, and I'm going to click OK. Just like that, it's built a swatch folder with all the colors that are being used inside of my artwork. And it doesn't matter if it was for a fill or a stroke, it's going to pull that in. And from here, you could double click on any swatch and adjust the colors. So up here at the top we have a swatch name, which it just automatically fills in the red, green, and blue values as the name. You could name it whatever you wanted to though. And down here we have the RGB values. You could switch to, again, any one of these, hue, saturation, brightness, to mix these colors up if I wanted to change it, make it a little bit more yellow. And I can click on preview as well, and that's going to give me a preview right here of that swatch changing, and then I could click OK. Now again, I didn't want to do that, so I'll undo, but that didn't actually update anything in my artwork. If I redo, you see that just the swatch is changing when I'm adjusting that swatch color. But there's actually a way to set up your colors so that adjusting the swatches updates all of the artwork using them. So I'm going to delete this folder one more time, make a selection of that artwork again, and then click on that folder. And this time, I'll rename it food. This time I want to make sure that Convert Process to Global is checked. Then I'll click OK, and I have this new little icon, this white triangle in the bottom right corner of each one of these swatches. This is letting me know that these are global swatches, and it's assigned all the colors I'm using to those swatches. So now if I were to double click on something like this pink and move it over to the side, I'll make sure that preview is selected. I can now adjust this, and as I'm making adjustments, you can see it's updating all the artwork using that swatch. So let's say I want it to be blue for whatever reason. There we go. I'll click OK, and that's been updated. This is a really, really powerful thing that I learned far into my career using Illustrator, but it is a great way to manage the colors of your artwork without having to make all of these complicated selections and then adjusting the color. The only unfortunate thing that I don't really like about this is that you can't use something like the eyedropper to change the swatch color, and there are no hex codes in here that I could easily update. You know, you don't see that hex code down here to copy and paste, so you would have to modify the sliders or type in the red, green, and blue values individually to update that. Still, it is a very helpful feature and I use it all the time. Let me undo to get back to my original colors. And now I want to look at another tool that makes adjusting colors pretty interactive. So I'm going to again make a selection of all of my colors, or all of my artwork rather, and then come up to this little circle with all these segments on it that's called Recolor Artwork. Again, this panel is the control panel under Window Control if you don't see it. But I'm going to click on that, and we get this Recolor Artwork panel. Now this is, again, a very robust and complex looking panel. It can do a whole lot of stuff, but we're just going to focus on a couple of different things. First of all, it loads up all the colors that were in your selection. So I have 7 colors, and they're all right here, as well as up here. These are all the active colors, which are exactly the same as the swatches. They even have the little triangle in the bottom right corner letting me know that these are global colors. But if we take a look at these current colors down here, it's showing all the colors from our selection, and if I were to click on any of them, I can modify the colors down here. So let's again say I want to adjust this. I can shift this around, see that update, and Recolor Art is checked. If that's not checked, you're not going to see the preview. But that's going to give you a different color. Now this color right here didn't change at all, but you see this little arrow and the new column. This is letting me know what the new color is going to be. Now, I want to reset that back, so this little eyedropper here resamples all of your original colors, resets everything back to the way it was. So I'll just click on that. And then move over to this Edit tab. We've been under Assign this whole time, but I'm going to click on Edit. Here we see a color wheel. Now if you remember, the hue value is being measured in degrees, and this is why. It's because it's a value on the color wheel. If I were to select my yellow color here, that's going to pin it on my color wheel, and I can see the hue, saturation, and brightness values for that specific color. So my hue is 48.83 degrees on that color wheel. If I were to shift this around, you can see it's moving around this color wheel like a clock. So 0 is again in the red channel, 360 loops back around to that channel. So that is exactly why that value of a hue is being measured in degrees and not some other percentage or other value. I'm going to reset my colors, and then take a look at this little menu right here. We can swap between RGB, HSB, CMYK even, and all these different color parameters just like before. But this allows you to just select individual colors and mix them like you're used to. But something that's really cool is that you can interactively adjust with these colors on the color wheel just by clicking and dragging them around, but you can also do them all at once. So let me reset my colors one more time and then come down to this little link button right here, Link Harmony Colors, and click it. Now if I were to grab and drag any one of these colors, you can see that all of the colors are moving around the hue spectrum with it. So it's keeping the relationships between all of these colors the same and just shifting them around the hue. So you can see how that's updating my my artwork and giving it a completely different feel. So now everything's super purpley. I can move it more towards the blue. So that's a great way to modify all of your colors at once. I'm going to reset all that again, and then take a look at this menu. Right down at the bottom we have Global Adjust. Now this gives us 4 options for adjusting all of our colors at once. Again, I'm going to make sure that that Link Harmony Colors is checked, or else it's only going to adjust the one color I've selected. But now that that's linked up, I could grab the saturation and turn it way down. I could take all the saturation out, and now I just have a grayscale image. Or I could boost the colors to make it much more poppy and vibrant. I'm going to set that back down to 0. And then we'll take a look at the brightness. This is going to increase or decrease the brightness. And this is adjusting the saturation to make it all a little bit more intense or less intense. Next up is the temperature, and if I turn this up, that's going to make everything more towards the reds and the oranges and warm the entire image up. Or if I move it in the opposite direction, it's going to pull everything to the blues. You see that all these colors, when this is set to 0, are spread out, and as soon as I start dialing them back, everything gets pulled, kind of constrained into these blues. Maybe this is too saturated. From here I could just grab it and bring the saturation down a little, maybe increase the brightness a little bit, and now I have a completely different feel for this artwork. If I wanted it to be much more warm, I could push it towards the warm colors, maybe increase the saturation a little, turn the brightness down or up depending on what you're going for. But again, you've just completely recolored your art. If I uncheck this, you can see where we were, and this is now just a much more uniform, kind of monochromatic looking color scheme. Let me reset this one more time, link those colors up, and our last option is luminosity. Now luminosity is kind of similar to brightness, and it might be a little bit confusing to distinguish those two, but take a look at what happens. When I turn the luminosity down, it's making the entire image darker, and if I turn it up, it's making everything a lot more washed out. Let's compare that to the brightness. So remember, turning luminosity down goes all the way to black. What happens if we turn down the brightness? It goes all the way down to the black. Okay, so they're basically doing the same thing, but if I turn the luminosity up, everything gets nice and washed out, and eventually it becomes this white color. If I turn it back down to 0 and I turn the brightness up, it doesn't wash stuff out. All of that color information is still there. It's increasing the brightness by increasing the saturation of everything and the brightness values. So you can think of brightness as kind of an intensity, and luminosity as kind of adding or subtracting brightness values of adding white or black to your overall image. Okay, so there's a really quick overview of the Recolor Artwork tool. There's a lot more that you can do with it, but I don't want to get you too far down that rabbit hole. Just be aware that those options are there for you to make adjustments to all of your artwork at once very intuitively. I'll cancel out of that. And now that we've kind of covered how to mix and match colors, how to make selections of them and make them into all these swatches that are easier to adjust, how do we pick colors? That is, one of the hardest things for a designer sometimes is picking colors and knowing which colors to use, what goes well together. I didn't make this art, and I don't know that I ever would have made bread the same color as a banana. But I think that this color palette actually works together really well. And unfortunately, the hard answer to how to pick colors is to just start doing it. It's something that comes with experience, but there are some ways to help you, guide you into picking colors that will inherently work better together. And to do this, I'm going to jump over to my browser to this website called Adobe Color. You can go to it through color.adobe.com. And this is going to give you a color wheel. And I'm actually going to make my window a little bit smaller so we can see more here. But what this is going to let you do is mix and match colors, and it will help you pick other colors that go well with your selected color based on some actual math. But it is, again, another way to very interactively make adjustments to your colors. So I can just click and drag, and you see that all of these colors are being adjusted at the same time. So what exactly are we looking at? Well, this is a color wheel, just like we were seeing in the Recolor Artwork tool. And if we look at this Color Harmony menu, we have some different options for how the other colors are being mixed in. This first one is called Analogous, and it's basically going to pick colors that are right next to each other on the color spectrum, on the color wheel. So this one right here in the middle has a little white triangle on it, and that is basically your source color that it's basing everything else off of. So if I click and drag it, it's going to move all the colors, again, in relationship to each other in the same way. If I make it saturated or desaturated, all the other colors are going to move around with it. From here, though, I could grab the outer color and spread it out, and it's going to evenly distribute all of these colors away from it the same distance. So that's our first option. Analogous are all colors that are right next to each other on that color wheel. Next up is monochromatic, and that's going to pick colors that are exactly in the same spot on the hue spectrum. It's just basically different shades of the same color. So I can move this around to whatever hue that I want, and it's going to pick colors that are very similar to it, but they can be used next to each other very well. Next up we have a triad, and this is going to give us an equilateral triangle basically on our color spectrum. So if I were to point this straight up and you connected this circle, and this circle, that's going to give you a perfectly equilateral triangle, which is why it's called a triad. These colors often work well together, and it produces a color palette that is called a triad. That's why it's named that. Again, you can interactively adjust the saturation or shift around the hue spectrum however you want. And at any point, you'll notice down here that it's giving you RGB and hex values for all of these colors. You can even expand it to get other values as well. But you can copy and paste these numbers just like you could inside of Illustrator. Next up is complementary, and these are colors that are going to be on direct opposite sides of the color wheel. These colors often work very well together. A great example of this is red and green. Christmas colors are often red and green, and the reason why they go well together is because they are complementary to each other on the color wheel. Next up is compound colors, and this is just another kind of more complex way of coming up with a color palette that's a lot more mathematical, but it often will give you very nice looking color palettes. And then finally we have shades, which is just allowing you to select one color, and then it's giving you shades of that exact same color. Alright, now that we've looked at all of those options, let's go back to something like the triad. And let's say that I wanted to pick a color to start with. Well, I could go into maybe this mint. I really like that mint. And look at the RGB values for it, and then copy that hex code. I'm just going to copy it, jump over to Adobe Color, and then paste it in right here and press Enter. Now I'm getting a triad color palette based on that one specific color. Now maybe the saturation of these two colors over here is not that great. I'm not really happy with that. Or maybe I want to shift everything over a little bit to make it a little bit warmer there and mix these cooler colors in. This is just an interactive way to be able to adjust these colors and come up with a color palette that you're happy with. And at any point, you could swap these around from being a triad to, say, a complementary color palette. And now I've just got these greens and purples. Okay, so let's say I'm happy with these 5 colors, and I want to get them into Illustrator. Well, I could copy and paste each one of these hex codes, or I could click on Save Color Theme. And now that that's been saved, I can actually jump back into Illustrator and come over to this panel right here, which is Libraries. And this is linked to my Adobe Creative Cloud account. And right there you see color themes. My color theme, which is what I named it right here, shows up. And these colors are exactly the same as what I had inside of Adobe Color. And to get to these colors, all I have to do is right-click and say Add to Swatches. And there we go. I've got a folder that's named My Color Theme, whatever you named it in Adobe Color, and I have access to each one of those colors here now, and I can very easily make adjustments. So let's again, use our magic wand, Y on the keyboard to select that yellow, and let's say I want to make it this purple. And then I could select all of this green, make it a darker green. These colors aren't necessarily going to work great together in the way that I'm applying them, but you can very easily use Adobe Color to build out a swatch library like that and start applying it to your artwork inside of Illustrator very quickly. Let me undo to get back to my original art, and there's one last thing I want to talk about, and I'm actually just going to make a new layer and turn that one off really quickly. And what I want to talk about is color combinations that can actually produce kind of like an eye strain. They're sometimes referred to as vibrating colors, and a great example is red and green. So let me just make a really bright green color, and I'll make a rectangle. That's already so hard to look at just because of how pure bright green that is. But then let's say I got some text. Press T on the keyboard, and I'm going to make this a bright red color. And I'll type out, "Can you read this?" And I'm going to make it nice and big. Looks like I lost my red color. Let me just make it nice and red. There we go. So on this white background, you can read it. It's not pretty, but you can read that. Let me make it nice and bold, and I'll even make it all caps. If I go up to my properties panel, here we go. I can come into my character palette, expand that out, and then this button right here is all caps. There we go. It's all caps. If I scale it down a little bit and move it on top of this green, you can read that, but the edges of the text, that's actually producing almost a headache. It's hard for me to look at that. Those two colors, which are complementary on that color wheel, if I recolor this artwork and look at that color wheel, they're on opposite ends. And if I were to push this even more green and a little bit more red, that right there, those are perfectly complementary. That's really hard to look at. If I link this up and shift it around, right there, blue and orange, complementary colors. That's really hard to look at as well, even if I reverse it. So just shifting this around with such intense colors, you can see that a lot of times complementary colors this intense can be hard to read text on top of, and this can even happen with just basic shapes. Now, certain complementary colors don't produce this effect, like yellow and purple, for whatever reason, even these blue and orangey yellows. But as soon as you get into this area right here, that can really strain your eyes. It's something you need to be very aware of as a designer when you're picking colors. If anything is ever kind of producing that strain on your eyes, you need to take a look at how those colors are interacting with each other on that color wheel, and either pull some saturation out of one of them, change the value, which is again the brightness of the color a little bit on some of them, or maybe even just completely change the hue of the color until you get something that works well. Alright, I'm tired of looking at that, so I'm going to delete it. And that's the last little color tip that I'm going to give you. Color is a huge, huge topic. It is a skill that you have to develop as a designer, and it will be constantly being developed throughout your entire career. So don't expect to be able to just jump in and pick colors and be super happy with them all the time. It's definitely got easier for me, and even more recently, pretty fun to just start picking colors almost at random and just seeing how they interact. It's kind of become a fun process for me. But like I said at the beginning, I understand if this is going to be a struggle for you, so I hope that these tips and techniques that I just covered will actually help you in that process. So just stick with it, look at other people's art and see how they've used colors in interesting and unique ways to see what works well together, and maybe some color combinations that don't work so well. If you ever see something that doesn't work well together, think about why it might not be working. Is it because those colors are complementary and they don't work well next to each other, or are they just kind of muddy and ugly? Why are they ugly, and why does it make you feel that way when you're looking at those colors? These are all questions that you should be thinking about to start developing and training your eye on how to pick colors. Alright, I know that was a lot, so go take a break. I hope that you got a lot out of this lesson. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.